Well, do we need to rest and cease from our wearying schedules? Well, you're in Mark. Turn to chapter 6. I want to show you something interesting. And some of you need to highlight this verse because it's so easy if you really love the Lord and if you're active in the church. Mark 6:31 is the verse we're going to look at. Sometimes we need Jesus to pull alongside of us and say what he said to his disciples. Jesus said to his disciples, look at chapter 6, verse 31. And he said to them, "Come aside by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while." I mean, these guys were all revved up. They had gone out 2 by 2. They had ministered. They had cast out demons. They had healed people. They had preached the good news of the kingdom. And not only was Jesus getting crowds, they were getting crowds. And look what had happened in verse 31. For there were many coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. I mean, they were living the American life, only they didn't have fast food. And so it was very hard to live the American life. Because, back then you had to crush the olives, and then you had to grind the wheat, and then you had to put the olives and the wheat together, and then you had to, put it on a board and push it in and start a fire and heat it up. And I mean, people didn't normally do that for you. You cooked for yourself mostly back then. And so they were living the fast life without fast food. So what does Jesus say? Well, right after his teaching on the Sabbath rest, he invited his disciples to enjoy the serenity and the tranquility and the rest of solitude. He says, "Come apart for a while and rest with me." And as Jesus and the disciples needed to cease from their labors and rest, so should we learn to regularly cease. And our spiritual lives need this time of reflection. I don't know if how you were taught in school, but I went to the old-fashioned public schools where we had to take Latin and we had to study and we had to read. And I mean, sometimes I wonder what they do in school nowadays. But we were told that you had to spend an equal amount of time thinking about what you read. You didn't just read, but if you're going to read for an hour, you read for 45 minutes, and then you thought about it for a few minutes and tried to figure out what you read. And that's a good lesson, not just for your textbooks, but for the Bible. But it's not just a good lesson for our devotions, it's a good lesson for our lives. If we never reflect, how do we know where we've been and where we're going? And our spiritual lives need reflection. We need a time of rest. We need a time of renewal. We need a time to refocus. I like what the Wheaton pastor, Kent Hughes, says. He said this: "The 7-day pattern is best for the soul. For properly observed in worship," listen to this, this is what I like about what he said, "it brings heaven's cadence to all of life." What does that mean? Well, he's talking about the 7-day pattern. You say, what do you mean the 7-day pattern? Well, people have tinkered with this. The French Revolution, remember when they were chopping everybody's head off? One thing they decided was no Sabbath observance. No. Everybody's going to work 7 days a week in our new society of the French Revolution. And if you study history, like I spent so much of my life studying, did you know that there was a cultural breakdown in France in the 70 years that followed, and they actually abolished the abolition of the Sabbath? Why? Because people that work 7 days a week have so much stress building up, they start having stress-related social, societal, and medical and personal ills. It's kind of like if we have a facility here that repairs airplanes. They have to recycle American Airlines' fleet of however many hundred planes they have on a regular schedule, and they have to let those planes rest. I mean, they take them all apart, and they just sit there, and they renew them, and then they send them back out. If you don't do that, then you have breakdowns. And who wants to break down in midair, right? And so that's the concept God said with our bodies. The Russians. Did you know when the socialists took over Russia, you know what they did? They said, "Begone with God, the great society. We will have 10-day work weeks. With no God, 7-day week. We will have a 10-day week." And you know what? They, more than 2 or 3 years into the revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, and all of Marx and Engels and everybody's, they had to run back to the 7-day week and even give the people a day off. Because again, their bodies started falling apart. So what Hughes is saying is, we're not French revolutionists nor Bolsheviks, but God said the 7-day pattern is best for the soul. And when properly observed, not as some new form of legalism, but as a spiritual delight, it brings, and I quote him, heaven's cadence to all of our life. Cadence, what is that? We march with heaven. How do you do that? By stopping your life and reflecting. I remember the days in Grace Community Church. I always used to wonder how the people rested, because when I would park early in the morning, everyone was pulling in next to me at the parking lot at Grace Community Church with their car and their boat and the coolers piled and all the life jackets and all their boogie boards and their stuff that they were going to go. And the people jumped out of the car, and man, if John went 10 minutes over, they were all going, come on, we don't want to be late to lake whatever. And I wondered, where did they get heaven's cadence into their life when they gave the Lord 1 hour of undivided attention, and then they divided it up looking at their watch, worrying about when they were going to get to the lake. It's amazing. Well, where are we in America today? Where are we in Tulsa? Aren't we far from rest? How far are we from rest? Well, I'd like to share a few insights that those who spend their lives studying our culture have noted. And sometimes we just need to let these social observers, just let them look at American culture and see where we've gotten. Because sometimes if you don't stand back, you can't see where we are. And I think this is fascinating. And for just a moment, turn back to Isaiah. We're going to stick in Isaiah for a few more minutes because there are 3 passages I want you to see. Back to Isaiah 58. And if you haven't marked your Bible yet, you ought to write verses 6 to 12, biblical fasting, and verses 13 and 14, biblical rest. Because that's what the Lord offers. It's not some day. It's not if you don't do anything on Saturday, you're going to get lots of blessings. No, if you spend intimate time alone with God, ceasing from your customary life, you'll never come to the end of the blessing, is what he's saying. But let me read to you verses 13 and 14, the way Ken Taylor wrote them for his kids. That's called the Living Bible. Remember, the Living Bible is kind of like Ken Taylor's sermon to his kids. It's not a Bible. It's a Bible story. He didn't try and translate the Bible. He tried to explain it. So it really focuses the ideas. And here's what he said. If you keep the Sabbath holy, not having your own fun and business on that day, but enjoy the Sabbath, speaking of it with delight as the Lord's holy day, and honoring the Lord in what you do, not following your own desires and pleasure or talking idly, verse 14, then the Lord will be your delight, and I will see to it that you ride high and get your full share of the blessings I promised to Jacob, your father. The Lord has spoken. I always have liked Taylor's ride high, because the Christian life lived as it was meant to be lived makes people think we're high. It does. In the height of the coke-snorting days of L.A., when Bonnie and I mostly knew unsaved people, now we mostly know saved people, but when we started out in ministry, most of our friends were lost. Many of them were into drugs and everything else. Many of them thought that we had discovered a new drug. They used to ask us systematically. They'd say, what are you guys on? And I always remember the one that asked me most clearly. He stuck his face right into mine, and I looked into his. When you snort cocaine in the 80s, your nostrils got very large, and his nostrils were almost this big, from too many wadded up dollar bills stuck up them, when they snort. And I remember those 2 big nostrils coming right next to my face, and he said, "What are you on?" And we told him, we're riding high on the delights of God. Now, if your neighbors don't ever think you're high, maybe it's because you don't rest in the Lord enough to get that way. Well, let's look at this. Do you see rest and quietness and confidence as described right here, this 13 and 14? Do you see that in your life, or do you see weariness and pandemonium and upheaval in your life?